Thanksgiving this Thursday, and as parents, you're a parent. We want to teach our kids to be courteous, right, and respectful, and to listen, and to always say thank you. Wow, you guys are good. You caught on real quick. I'm thankful for that. And how many times do we have to remind them, right? It's one of those nice things, respectable, courteous things in our world, right? But, if we're honest with ourselves, even as adults, and yes, even as Christians, right, we sometimes need to be reminded to be thankful as well. And, because, it drives me crazy when we're in the car, when I give someone a pass if they want to change the lane, or if they kind of cut in front of me, but they don't give me the obligatory, and I'm like, yeah, it's the last time I'm going to let you cut in, it's like I'm ever going to see him again, right? Or when you hold the door open for somebody and they just walk by with their nose in the air and they can't say thank you or something, there's something about that. It bothers us, Thanksgiving's coming this week, and so what I want to talk about just for a few moments is what it means to be a Thanksgiver. Because when it comes to remembering to give thanks, again, I think if we're honest, most of us, sometimes we remember, sometimes we don't, right? And how does giving thanks even slip our minds at times? Do we actually need a holiday to remind us to be thankful, to give thanks, right? Maybe, but maybe not. We're just too busy at times to remember. I think that's kind of the theme of our life lately. It's just or we're thinking about the next thing to do on our to-do list, or maybe it's because maybe it's even because sometimes we think we're entitled to receive something and we don't need to give thanks. But at home, we're often thinking about what needs to be done, what errands have to take place, especially this week maybe with all of the, if you're hosting Thanksgiving dinner at your home, but also it's who needs to be dropped off and picked up, what's the next appointment, is if you have kids, as they grow and grow, then it's you have to go and go, and in the midst of the going and going, we've got to sometimes hit the pause button. Just stop and give thanks. I don't know how many of you took up our challenge from last Sunday, because this was also our past week, by the way. Our church is involved with a lot of other churches in Rhode Island of taking one day a month. And last Tuesday was our day to pray from midnight all the way through midnight, a 24-hour day on Tuesday. And I'm thankful that some of you responded, because it's like, how do I do that? And that prayer sheet allowed us, I'm praying through, and I found it was very easy actually to pray for an hour. Some of you expressed the same thing, that the psalm that was given on that sheet was just, God's gift to me that day. I just needed to read through and pray through. But what I also did is I began that prayer time, I don't know so this is the challenge I'm talking about, is the challenge that came from Tracy last Sunday of just taking 5 minutes a day to just be in God's presence, which means, we're not praying the agenda yet on that sheet. I wanted to begin that time by going, all right, I'm just going to begin with 5 minutes of quiet, just trying to focus my thoughts, my heart on God, not in any particular way, just to be in His presence, maybe to hear. And I got through about 10 seconds before my mind started wandering. I'm going, man, this is a lot harder than it looks. That's why it takes practice and discipline to do that. And I tried it again at the end of that prayer, and it was a little easier at the end because I had just gone through, and that was maybe now my mind was emptied from all these other things from praying. But just continue the task, by the way. Just continue the discipline of just doing that. But sometimes that's what it takes in our lives, right? Just to pause for a moment. Today we're just talking about pausing and thinking about what are we thankful for, right? Because I'm sure we're all guilty at times of not giving thanks for gifts. I'm working on this message and I'm going, oh my word, I forgot to thank somebody for a birthday gift from September. I tried giving them a call, they weren't home. So I got to keep trying again, because I got to go, I have to remind myself to do this, whether it's a gift or an act of kindness or someone does you a favor, and we just kind of forget to give thanks. But can you imagine, though, even as Christians, we forget sometimes to give thanks to, of all people, Jesus. So there's this story in the Bible about a group of people who did not give thanks. And it's sort of the go-to story for Thanksgiving messages, which is why I actually haven't used it for like 10 years. But I'd like to briefly go back to that story again this morning and point out just a couple of truths for us as we move into this week. And I want to get a little bit practical too about giving some thanks, all right? Because I want us to be better thanksgivers. So the story is found in the Gospel of Luke. It's in chapter 17. And I'm going to read verses 11 through 19 because that's the story that we have, all right? Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And they went, and they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice, and he threw himself at Jesus' feet, and he thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. And Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" And then he said to him, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." That's the story, right? Jesus and his followers, they're on their way to Jerusalem, and it's actually Jesus' final journey into Jerusalem. They're going there to celebrate the Passover, and in order to get there, they had to cross through this region between Samaria and Galilee. And on their way to Jerusalem, there were a lot of small towns, a lot of small villages, and this is where maybe a caravan could stop, get some rest, get some supplies, and then continue on with their journey. Now, we don't know exactly which village Jesus stopped at here, but we do know who was waiting for him when he arrived, right? As Jesus is approaching this village, there were 10 men who had leprosy who were waiting there to meet him. But they stood at a distance. See, leprosy is a disease that still exists today, in fact. It's a horrible, horrible skin disease in which the skin slowly decays and deteriorates and you lose feeling. And so you don't even know when you injure yourself. And therefore you don't take care of that. And it's really a bad thing. And we don't know exactly what these 10 people had, because the word leprosy was used for all kinds of skin diseases at the time. But it doesn't matter. What we do know is these men actually were social outcasts because of this leprosy, the skin disease. Because if you were diagnosed of having a skin disease back then, you were by law forced to leave your family, your friends, your job, and your community. You could only live with others who had similar skin diseases. That became your community. You were quarantined together. You were not allowed to have contact with anybody else, with any other people. And if you were walking down the street, think about this part of it. If you were walking down the street, you were supposed to yell, "Unclean! Unclean!" so that people would not accidentally come in contact with you. Because it was always assumed that you were contagious. And actually part of the culture, this was not from God, by the way, but part of it was also the belief that, and by the way, you have that disease because of some type of sin in your life. And you're being punished. It's your fault. This is God's retribution on you. And that's not God. Just saying that was the perception from some people, right? And can you imagine having to walk around calling out unclean because you were unclean or considered unclean by everybody around you? And what a way to live, right? But that's why these 10 men were standing at a distance, by the way. We can't get close. But they also knew this was their chance. With these people living on the outskirts of the village that was well-traveled, by the way, word had spread maybe that this rabbi, this healer, was passing through. He had healed the blind, the deaf, the mute, brought back the dead, fed thousands of people. So could this man have the power to heal a skin disease? And so they waited anxiously. Anticipation was there at the entrance of the village, waiting for Jesus to show up. And finally they see the crowd, and in that crowd there's Jesus, and there's that moment right there, that moment of hope that they've been waiting for. And they cried out, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And their cry, by the way, acknowledged Jesus as Master and asked, "Can you have mercy? Would you have pity on us?" And they get Jesus' attention. So Luke tells us, when Jesus saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." Now that might not make much sense to us, because we'd want to go get checked out by a doctor, right? And actually they would too. Luke, whose gospel this is, he's a doctor. Maybe he's one that they would go to. But ultimately, it's the priest at the temple who is given the responsibility to determine whether or not someone was fit to rejoin society, even when it came to skin diseases. So people would come to the priests, and if the priest checked them out and he gave them a clean bill of health, they could go back and rejoin their family and their friends. So these 10 people leave. Jesus says, "Go show yourself to the priest." They start walking. And then something unbelievable happens. It says, as they went, they were cleansed. I don't know if we can put ourselves in their sandals for a moment here. But can you imagine what they were feeling at that moment? The excitement, the ecstasy. Here they're walking, and they begin to look at their hands and their arms and their legs and their feet, and they're walking along, and sores begin to heal. Itching begins to diminish. Color begins to come back to their skin. And as they went, they aren't just healed, they're cleansed. They were no longer unclean. Now all they had to do is present themselves to the priests, and guess what? We're going to be able to, at that moment, return to our families, our wives, our children, our friends, after years perhaps of isolation. Man, can you imagine what's going through their heads and their hearts and their emotions and all of that at that moment? But then something strange happens. One of them, when he saw that he's healed, he comes back to Jesus, praising God in a loud voice. It says he threw himself at Jesus' feet and he thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. This one man knew that he needed to go back to Jesus and say thank you. It just hit him, and he turned around and made a beeline back to Jesus, and now he's crying out again, only this time it's not unclean, unclean. He's crying out, praising and giving thanks to God. And then when he sees Jesus, he doesn't just stop, he falls down at his feet. His face is resting on Jesus' feet. Maybe that's the first human touch he's had in a long time. And he's just expressing thanks. Luke adds a little twist to the story. He ends that verse right there and says, "And he was a Samaritan," which doesn't necessarily sound like a big deal, or kind of sort of like, why would you say that? But Luke's readers really would have gotten the point there, because that is a huge deal. You see, Samaritans were considered half-breeds by the Jewish people of the south. In the Old Testament, when the kingdoms were split north and south, the Samaritans were part of the northern Jews. You know, the northern Jews and all of their kings in the Old Testament, not one of them was a godly king. Right? And they began to worship idols, and they intermarried with non-Jews. And so all of their children, which is now the Samaritans, would have been considered half-breeds. And they were looked down upon by the Jews, and they were never good enough. And out of all the people to return and give thanks to this Jewish rabbi, it's a Samaritan. And Jesus answers, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return to give praise to God except this foreigner, this Samaritan? So why did only one person return? What was it that made this one person turn around and come back to Jesus? Because after all, I mean, doing that means now I still got to go to the priest. It's just going to take longer for me maybe to see my friends, my wife, my family. But I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to take the time. We're all 10 grateful. Yeah, absolutely. Of course they were. All 10 of these people just experienced a life-changing miracle. Their lives were about to change forever. But only one person then turned that gratefulness into thanksgiving. He turned from being grateful into being thankful. He turned his gratefulness for what Jesus had done into thankfulness for what Jesus had done. And I think if there's one thing Jesus is trying to get at with these questions, it's this. In all of your busyness, can you stop and turn your gratefulness into thanksgiving, into thankfulness? Turn your thoughts of, I'm grateful for this, or I'm grateful for that person, and turn it into action, into an expression, into doing something. See, it's one thing to be grateful for something, but to be thankful for something takes action. It means you do something. You do something about it, just like this man who was healed. This man turned his gratefulness into thankfulness. I want to show you something real quick. It's actually was perfect timing. Over this past year, you remember that Grace D'Antuano had asked us to help sponsor I would say he was a child, he was a teenager, right, over in Africa. His name is Malandi, with the Imagine group that she's working with, right? And so this past week she sent me something, and Mike, I wanted to, accent's kind of foreign, so it may be a little bit difficult.
Hi, no, First Baptist
turn that up?
Church. My name is Mlondi, and my surname is Matlalela. Mausha Agricultural High School, and I'm currently in grade 9. I live in a rural area called Masbegela, which is situated in Nkomazi, basically here in South Africa. And something which I'm passionate about is playing chess, because I find chess quite interesting, and it has like unlimited beauty where you decide to take actions, or sometimes even like having your full mind and focus on the game. And currently I'm working on a project which is basically a project of like teaching basically grade 4 to 7 students how to play chess. And currently I have 14 students which were selected by the principal who are really interested in playing chess. And yeah, I think the project's going quite good. And yeah, thank you for sponsoring me. I really appreciate it. God bless you.
But if you caught that, that's Malandi. That's the person that we sponsor. He began by saying, "Hello, Norwood Baptist Church." So that was specifically to us. But here's the thing. Was he grateful for that? Absolutely. But he did this. That's an action. I'm going to make this video. I'm going to send it to you because I want to say thanks to you. And that takes thought and that takes effort. And he's just talking about learning to play chess and is now teaching younger kids how to play chess because it's a good critical thinking type game and all of that. You know? And I'm thinking, here's a prime example of what we're talking about this morning. And so turning gratefulness into thanksgiving. So at the end of this passage, Jesus says, rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Your faith has made you well. That's an amazing statement by Jesus as well, because it literally means to deliver out of danger and into safety. It's usually used when it speaks of God rescuing believers from the penalty and the power of sin and into his provision of safety. Okay? In essence, Jesus is saying, yeah, I didn't just come here to heal your disease. I came that you might be saved. And so for one person, his life changed the day he paused and he turned his gratefulness into thanksgiving. For some, maybe some of you here this morning, your life can change the day you just pause and turn your gratefulness for what Jesus has done for you into thankfulness for what he's done. So how do we do that? How do you make that more practical? See, you know what? Even if you're not having the greatest of days, it's good to recognize, isn't it, that there's still good in your life going on, that there's much to be thankful for. We may be grateful for all we have, but do we give thanks for our gratefulness? So part of that is to talk to God, right? Just tell him, to take the time to actually tell him what you're thankful for. It's an important part of our prayer. I'd even suggest that's how we begin our prayer times, of just either praising God for who he is, but making sure it's during that time we're actually thanking God, you know, with praises and thanksgiving. It kind of sets the tone. And be specific. You know, let your thanksgiving to God be specific. It's not generic. You know, God, thanks for everything. You know, no. Vary what it is that you're grateful for and give thanks for it, whether it's for physical belongings perhaps, or your health, your family, your job, your hopes, your dreams, whatever it is. Even if you're thrilled about an upcoming event, no matter how small it may seem or how large in our lives, to give thanks, but be specific. And if someone does something for you, don't just give the old, hey, thanks. Be specific. Give thanks for what they've done. Whatever it is, be specific. And don't let our thanksgiving stop with Jesus. Let it start there, but because there are people in our lives, right, with whom we need to give thanks to. And giving thanks is crucial, I think, when it comes to the overall health of our families or our workplace, school, friends, church. But be honest. Okay? Don't say thanks because you feel like you're supposed to. Say thanks because you're thankful, right? Samaritan didn't turn and go, oh, you know what? I should go with that thanks. That's something my parents taught me I should do this, so I'm just going to go. No. He did that because that's what he wanted to do, and he falls at Jesus' feet, and he is grateful, and that gratefulness led him to thankfulness. He's genuine. You know. And by the way, maybe I don't think this is showing my age, but make it permanent. What do I mean by that? I mean, put it in writing for somebody. Write someone a note, a thank you note telling them that you are thankful for them and why. I know emails, good. Texting is good. They're not permanent in the way that I'm talking about. A handwritten note especially today, means you took the time to go and be beyond and above the easy and the simple, right? You may not realize how many cards of yours over the years I've kept, that I can go back and remind myself that someone has cared and has turned their gratefulness into thankfulness. So turn your gratefulness into thankfulness by being specific, honest, making it permanent. And I hope this isn't a one and done deal for us. I hope it's just kind of a new way of thinking and living, if it's not already. Can you imagine what it would look like if just over the next week or two we got this one truth right? What would your dinner table look like if your family paused and periodically just spoke about gratefulness being turned into thankfulness? Being specific about that. Now, I know we're grateful. But in our busy world, we need to pause and let the world know we're not just grateful. We're thankful. And here's the beauty of this truth. We all have the ability to do this. This is not somebody else's job. It's all of our jobs. But don't do it out of that. We can't be but let's not be the 9 who are grateful, but not necessarily thankful. We need to be the one that stands out and proclaims and cries out, thank you, thank you, thank you.